Hey guys, this is John. Some of you may know that I've been working on a London system repertoire in recent months, and I'm happy to report that the repertoire is now for sale on Chessable. This is a repertoire that I co-authored with FIDE master Daniel Barish of South Africa. You might know Daniel if you studied the Short and Sweet London on Chessable before. He's the author of that. And what we set out to do in this repertoire is create a D4 repertoire for white based around the London system with about 100 lines of essential theory. So we do go into mainline London theory, but we also cover sidelines, so less common defenses that black can throw against you when you're opening with d4. And in addition to the theoretical section with about 100 lines of theory, there's also a model game section where I take you through 10 model games featuring expert handling of the London system for white. And there's also a tactics section at the end of the repertoire. And there's about 6 hours of video content total, and you can either purchase the repertoire with or without the video. So this video is just a preview of one of the model games. It is coincidentally a Magnus Carlsen game, Magnus handling the white side of the London. We didn't plan it this way. The World Championship is going on right now in London, and we didn't plan for Magnus to be one of the guys handling the London system. It kind of worked out that way. But he has dabbled in the London, so hey, I guess this is pretty good marketing. If you're interested in checking out a little bit more about this repertoire, there is a link to 2 more of the games in the description below if you want to go take a look at those. And if you have any questions about the repertoire, do not hesitate to ask in the comments. You can also ask on Chessable too. I'll be happy to answer your questions. So enjoy, guys. Thanks. In this chapter, we've selected games featuring some of the best players in the world handling the white side of the London system. In some cases, they prefer different move orders than the ones we proposed here, so we will note that when they occur. And we're going to use these games to explain the typical plans and ideas and suggest some things to watch out for in your own London system games. Now, who better to start with than the world champion himself, at least as of November 2018, early November 2018. This is about a week before the Carlsen-Caruana match that I'm making this video. But Magnus Carlsen is on the white side of this game, playing a very strong Polish grandmaster, Radoslaw Wojtaszek. This game was played at the 2015 European Championship. So Magnus opens with d4, knight f6, and Magnus prefers our move order, bishop f4 on move 2. Wojtaszek plays d5, e3, c5, so this is straight out of the d5, c5 chapter. And Magnus plays c3. Our preferred move order is knight f3, and then after knight c6, playing knight bd2. You might recall some of the sharp lines where black plays queen b6, eyeing up the pawn on b2, and after d takes c5, it can get very complicated and tactically sharp. But Magnus prefers this solid move c3, and most likely white is going to take with the e-pawn should black take. With c3, he could take here and transpose to an exchange Slav, but it's more in the spirit of the London system to take this way. So knight c6, Magnus plays knight d2. Black does indeed take, and Magnus takes with the e-pawn. Bishop f5. And I mentioned how when this bishop comes out here, it does leave the pawn on b7 vulnerable, and Magnus therefore plays queen b3 attacking it. Wojtaszek plays queen to c8 defending. Knight g to f3. e6. So far so normal. And now Magnus goes after the bishop pair. Knight h4, eyeing up that bishop on f5. And a lot of players would just play bishop g6 here. But Wojtaszek, very strong guy, theoretically very solid too. He plays bishop e4. And this is a nuance. So with bishop e4, black is trying to tempt white into playing f3, chasing the bishop again. But after f3, bishop g6, if there's a trade here, this is a worse version for white compared to the version if black had played bishop g6 immediately and there was a trade. That pawn being on f3 weakens white's king side a bit. In particular, white has to watch out for knight h5, attacking the bishop, and if the bishop were to move, knight g3 can often be a problem. So therefore, Magnus plays knight takes e4. And we've covered this line in the theoretical section. So we looked at black taking with the d-pawn now, d takes e4. And one thing I was noting there is that this does have the upside for black of stranding white's knight on h4. And you have to be careful if you're white that you don't run into something like h6 and g5 and getting caught with this knight out here and unable to get back to civilization. Therefore, white should play g3, looking to play this knight to g2, possibly with bishop e2, knight e3, castles to come. And with the bishop pair, white's comfortably better. It's still a fine position for black, but we would prefer white. But Wojtaszek, on the other hand, After knight takes e4, he decides not to double his pawns, and he just plays knight takes e4. And this too gives white something to think about with this knight on h4. g5 is a threat, forking these two pieces. So Magnus brings the knight back. And Wojtaszek hurries to trade the dark square bishops, plays bishop d6. There is a swap of the bishops, and Magnus develops this bishop to d3. And now for the next couple moves, both sides sort of jockey for positions with their queen, and they delay castling for a moment. So Wojtaszek plays queen c7, getting the king off of the back rank. If black does decide to castle here, one line that we noted is queen c2. This queen has now served its purpose out on b3, distracting black a little bit, forcing black to play queen c8, so it makes sense to return it here, creating a queen-bishop battery against h7. And after h6, we can transfer the queen to e2, and white has promising play in the center and on the king side. I like the plan of castling, playing rook a e1, and looking for an opportunity to play knight e5, possibly followed with f4, and we'll have a rook on f1 that could back that up. White may have the makings of a kingside attack. And for black, you can expect them to try to expand on the queen side, looking for a minority attack. But white has the king in their sights, and black, in general, has the queen side in their sights, trying to create a weakness here. But Wojtaszek plays queen c7, and Magnus responds in kind. He plays queen c2, bringing his queen back. And now Wojtaszek, to his credit, he plays a brave move. So he castles queenside. And Magnus responds by castling kingside. And this is something unique. I don't think we've looked at any positions in this repertoire where black has castled queenside and white has castled kingside, so this will be fun to look at. We know that the dominant plan when this side happens is a pawn storm for both sides. So Wojtaszek plays h6 here, and that's not played so much to save this pawn, because a move like bishop takes h7 in these positions is virtually unthinkable. The bishop's going to get trapped after g6, but that is usually going to indicate preparation for g5. Magnus plays a4, so launching his queenside pawns forward. And now Wojtaszek decides to tidy up his queenside a little bit. He plays king b8. Magnus plays rook e1, good centralization move, further enhancing white's outpost on e5. And now rook c8. And here it's worth pointing out that black has a strategic threat of knight b4. You know, if Magnus were to play an indifferent move here, then knight b4 could be a problem for him, because we don't want the trade to occur on c2. White has much worse pawns. Black's rook is invading. White's clearly worse here. So if knight b4 was successfully executed, white would probably have to move the queen and we get a swap. And if that knight is able to trade itself for white's bishop on d3, I don't think white can expect any advantage here with just knight versus knight, nothing to show for it. So on rook c8, Magnus plays a retreat. He goes queen to d1. And for the next couple of moves, he plays some interesting strategic retreats. Wojtaszek plays rook he8. It would be interesting for Wojtaszek to keep his head down a little bit and start playing on the king side as opposed to going in the center. But he decides to shift more towards a central break strategy. Magnus plays bishop f1, rook e7, rook c1, rook d8. And now a nice move by Magnus, and this entire sequence impresses me a lot as an international master, but nowhere near these guys' level. I don't think I would ever conceive of this idea on my own. So he plays rook e2 with the idea of using e1 as a redeployment square for the knight. We've talked a lot about how the knight can get to e5, but I have not mentioned how knight e1 to d3 could be an option for white, using this pawn on d4, maybe even jumping to c5 in some cases. So Wojtaszek comes into the center, knight e4. He should probably play g5. As I said, he seems like he's a little bit hesitant to play on the king side, but it still wasn't too late to do that. So knight e4, and Magnus doesn't forget about his queenside majority. He plays b4. Black proposes a trade, and white declines the trade. Magnus drops the knight back to e1 per the plan. You wouldn't want to take here. That would be cooperative, because after h takes g5, that pawn on h2 is going to be a weakness. Rook h8, and black would be threatening checkmate. So don't fall in line with your opponent's plans. Knight e1. And now Wojtaszek, understandably, was probably getting a little antsy here. He decides to play e5 and break in the center. But this leads to an opening of the position that's in white's favor. So Magnus plays b5, attacking the knight. Knight to a5. There's a trade on the e5 square. And Magnus plays this move c4. And despite having all his pieces on the back rank, it is black who is the one on the defensive, and black starts to become overextended. The position is gradually opening up, and that bodes well for white with the bishop. So that imbalance, even though this bishop is, for the moment, on the back rank, that imbalance is persisting. Note that this pawn is pinned. Black cannot take because of queen takes d8. So Wojtaszek tries to marshal his defenses here. He plays knight e6. And Magnus goes knight f3. So interestingly, this knight didn't complete its route to d3, but now it can come back to the f3 square with tempo. And here, Wojtaszek is definitely best off playing queen d6 and trying to defend the d-pawn. He relies on a little tactics, so he plays queen f4, c takes d5, rook takes d5, deflecting white's queen from the defensive c1. But the problem is, after this happens, the opening of the position is still favoring white. So this g3 move is very nice. This allows white to get rid of any sort of back rank weakness. It prepares for the bishop in the future to come to one of these squares. And as we wrote in the notes, Grandmaster Stoll also commented this game. White, surprisingly, is essentially winning here because his pieces are coordinating much better than black's. And that is some high-level chess in a situation like this where black is not even down any material. It's black's move. White is even a little bit pinned up temporarily, but white's pieces occupy more dangerous positions, especially, I would say, the queen and the bishop, but don't discount this knight jumping to the center too, as it soon does. So Wojtaszek tries to play queen c5. If he could get a queen trade in, he'd be ecstatic because then any chance white has for the initiative is going to dissipate and white would have to tend to this a4 pawn. So Magnus obviously declines that. He plays queen d7. Wojtaszek plays queen f8. Note that the pawn on f7 is under attack, so black must do something about that. But queen f8 is not a move you really like to play. Knight e5 increases the pressure here, and things start to fall like dominoes for black. If that pawn moves, then e6 is undefended. Wojtaszek tries knight c5, again, attempting to induce white to trade queens. If Magnus wants to take on f7, we could get a swap, but then black takes here, and the situation is not so clear. So Magnus keeps himself well centralized, queen d5. And now he has a rather vicious threat. And if you spotted this threat, nice job. Queen takes c5, queen takes c5, knight d7 check, and the knight can pivot back and white will have one apiece. So Wojtaszek tries to bring his king to the center, king c7, but that does nothing about this f7 pawn, so white scoops it up. Black takes on a4, so still evening up the material, but have a look at these knights on the side of the board. Magnus gives a check on e5, and this drives black's king further into the center. Note that if black steps to one of the light squares here, this bishop is going to make an appearance on h3, and it's going to be... actually, that's going to be checkmate. If something like king d7. I had to stop myself for a second, because it looks like black should have a flight square here with all these squares potentially being available, but that's actually just checkmate. So queen e5. Black goes into the great wide open, king b6. But now knight d6. Nasty move. Centralizing again. And that's the name of the game. With the queen and knight so close to the black king, there are just too many threats for black to cope with. Black tries to bring this knight back into the equation. But now another knight move by Magnus, knight e8. The threat here is queen c7, checkmate. Notice that the pawn on b5 is defended by the light square bishop. And black doesn't have a good defense to that because if the queen goes somewhere to help defend, let's say queen f7, then queen d6 is devastating. This would force black to play knight c6. White can take it, ongoing attack. This is going to be lights out soon. So very interesting to see how the position opened up in white's favor. And also just some of the subtle moves in the opening too. So if we scroll back, I think this stage of the game made an impression on me. Queen c7, Magnus not being in a hurry to commit his king, playing queen c2. As soon as black castles queenside, then he goes kingside. And some of these strategic retreats were very, very high level, especially this move rook e2, making way for knight e1, looking for knight d3. That could be a maneuver to remember. So well played by the world champion Magnus Carlsen. We hope you enjoyed this free preview. If you'd like to check out the full repertoire, head over to chessable.com/essentiallondon.